Effortless State, Part 1. The best free throw shooter ever is not Michael Jordan or Steph Curry. It's Elena Del Don. Her success rate at the free throw line across her career is 93.4%. That's not just the highest in WNBA history, but higher than any player in the NBA history as well. If you look at her postseason record, it's even higher, 96.4%. Put simply, she is the best free throw shooter ever. Her secret is to trust a simple process she's practiced since 8th grade. She steps up to the line, finds the dot with her right foot, lines up her feet, takes 3 dribbles, makes an L with her arm, then lifts and flicks. If you keep it simple, less can go wrong, she says. The most important part of the process, not overthinking it. The biggest thing on the foul line is you can't let too much get inside your head. In other words, the secret to Dawn's success is her ability to get into what I call the effortless state. You are like a supercomputer designed with extremely powerful capabilities. You're built to be able to learn quickly, solve problems intuitively, and compute the right next action effortlessly. Under optimal conditions, your brain works at incredible speeds. But just like a supercomputer, your brain does not always perform optimally. Think about how a computer slows down when its hard drive gets cluttered with files and browsing data. The machine still has incredible computing power, but it's less available to perform essential functions. Similarly, when your brain is filled with clutter, like outdated assumptions, negative emotions, and toxic thought patterns, you have less mental energy available to perform what's most essential. A concept in cognitive psychology known as perceptual load theory explains why this is the case. Our brain's processing capacity is large but limited. It already processes over 6,000 thoughts a day. So when we encounter new information, our brains have to make a choice about how to allocate the remaining cognitive resources. And because our brains are programmed to prioritize emotions with high affective value, like fear, resentment, or anger, these strong emotions generally win out, leaving us with even fewer mental resources to devote to making progress on things that matter. Effortless state. When your computer is running slowly, all you have to do is hit a few buttons to clear all the browsing data, and immediately the machine works smoother and faster. In a similar way, you can learn simple tactics to rid yourself of all the clutter, slowing down the hard drive of your mind. By hitting a few buttons, you can be restored to your original effortless state. Perhaps you have experienced what it feels like to return to the effortless state. Imagine it's the end of a long day. You have a headache that you can't seem to shake. You can't remember where you've put your phone or your keys. Even the smallest, most reasonable requests a client asks for, a piece of information via a confusing voicemail, or your child wants to be picked up from piano lessons, fill you with resentment. A piece of constructive feedback from your boss spins you out. You're convinced you're a failure. You're irritable with your spouse, and you can't find the right words to express how overwhelmed you feel. Why does everything feel so hard, you wonder? Then, after a warm meal, a hot shower, and a good night's sleep, things look completely different. You wake up clear-headed, grateful for another day. You find your phone and keys right where you left them. You immediately know how to respond to the voicemail, not so confusing after all, and you do so with grace. You want nothing more than to sit quietly in the car with your child for a few minutes on the way back from piano lessons. You find the right words to say to your spouse. I'm sorry about that. Please forgive me. You thank your boss for the feedback and mean it. Your inherent capabilities are restored. When you return to your effortless state, you feel lighter, in 2 senses of the word. First, you feel less heavy, unburdened. You aren't as weighted down. Suddenly, you have more energy. But lighter also means more full of light. When you remove the burdens in your heart and the distractions in your mind, you are able to see more clearly. You can discern the right action and light the right path. The effortless state is one in which you are physically rested, emotionally unburdened, and mentally energized. You are completely present, attentive, and focused on what's important in that moment. You are able to do what matters most with ease. Chapter 1. What if this could be easy? 4 a.m. and I'm up photoshopping pictures. Really? Kim Jenkins wanted to do what really mattered, but it was hard not to feel overwhelmed. For one thing, the university where she worked was undergoing an immense expansion. The client base had doubled in the last few years, but they were operating with virtually the same staff and resources as before. With expansion of the organization had come an expansion of complexity everywhere. They were new and difficult to decipher internal policies. There was a tedious new system for handling compliance. Processes had grown cumbersome, and now all of their projects and programs took more energy and time. Well-intentioned people had added but never subtracted. They had taken work that used to be simple and made it maddeningly unnecessarily complicated. As a result, the effort required to get her work done had become Herculean, and Kim had a tendency to be really hard on herself. She said, "I thought if I wasn't putting in tremendous effort, sacrificing any time for myself, then I was being incredibly selfish." Then one day it hit her. This was all so much harder than it ought to be. With that realization, she said, "I could see it all for what it was, layers and layers of unnecessary complexity. I could see how it was expanding all the time and how it was suffocating underneath all of it." She decided it was time to make a change. When faced with a task that felt impossibly hard, she would ask, "Is there an easier way?" She soon had the opportunity to put this method to the test. When a faculty member called her and asked if she could have her videography team record a full semester of a class. In the past, she would have jumped in with both feet, put her team to work for 4 months, and looked for ways to go above and beyond, adding music, intros, outros, graphics. This time she wondered if there was an easier way to get desired results. A brief conversation revealed that the videos were intended for a single student who couldn't make it to class due to a sports commitment. He didn't need a highly produced record with lots of bells and whistles. He just needed a way to avoid falling behind in his class. So she thought, what if they simply asked another student to record those lectures on a smartphone? The professor was delighted with the solution, Kim said, and it cost her just a couple minutes of planning instead of months of work for her whole videography team. Hard work may not be well named. All too often we sacrifice our time, our energy, and even our sanity, almost believing that sacrifice is essential in and of itself. The problem is that the complexity of modern life has created a false dichotomy between things that are essential and hard and things that are easy and trivial. It's almost like a natural law for some people. Trivial things are easy, important things are hard. Our language helps to reveal our deeper assumptions. Think of these revealing phrases. When we accomplish something important, we say it took blood, sweat, and tears. We say important achievements are hard-earned, when we might say earned. We recommend a hard day's work when day's work would suffice. Then there are ways our language betrays our trust of ease. When we talk of easy money, we are implying it was obtained through illegal or questionable means. When we use the phrase, "that's easy for you to say," as a criticism, usually when we are seeking to invalidate someone's opinion. It's curious to me how we default to saying like, "it won't be easy, but it's worth it," or "it's going to be really hard to make that happen, but we should try." It's like we automatically accept the right way, inevitably the harder one. It's like we automatically accept that the right way is inevitably the harder one. In my experience, this is hardly ever questioned. Indeed, if you do challenge this sacred cow, it can be uncomfortable. We don't even pause to consider that something important and valuable could be made easy. What if the biggest thing keeping us from doing what matters is the false assumption that it has to take tremendous effort? What if instead we consider the possibility that the reason something feels hard is that we haven't yet found an easier way to do it? The path of least effort. Our brain is wired to resist what it perceives and hard and welcome what it perceives as easy. Our brain is wired to resist what it perceives as hard and welcome what it perceives as easy. This bias is sometimes called cognitive ease principle or principle of least effort, our tendency to take the path of least resistance to achieve what we want. We don't need to look far to see this principle in action. We buy something at the overpriced convenience store on the corner because it's easier than getting in the car and driving to the store where the prices are lower. We put our dishes in the sink instead of the dishwasher because one less step required. We let our teenager text her dinner because it's easier than inviting an argument by trying to enforce the no phones rule. We accept the first minimally credible information we find online about a subject because it's the easiest way to get our questions answered, and so on. From an evolutionary perspective, this bias for ease is useful. For most of human history, it's been crucial to our survival and progress. Just imagine if humans had a bias for the path of most resistance. What if our ancestors had been wired to ask, what's the hardest way to obtain food, to provide our family shelter, to maintain relationships within our tribe? They wouldn't have made it. Our survival as a species grows out of innate preference for taking the path of least effort. What if, rather than fighting our pre-programmed instinct to seek the easiest path, we could embrace it or even use it to our advantage? What if, instead of asking, how can I tackle this really hard but essential project, we simply inverted the question and asked, what if this essential project could be made easy? For some, the idea of working less hard feels uncomfortable. We feel lazy. We fear we'll fall behind. We feel guilty for not going the extra mile each time. This mindset, conscious or not, may have its roots in the Puritan idea that the act of doing hard things always has inherent value. Puritanism went beyond embracing the hard. It extended to also distrusting the easy. How to try too hard. At a key moment in my career, a client at a high-profile technology company asked me to give 3 presentations on leadership. They told me that if it went well, they were prepared to hire me for the next year or more. It was exactly the career break I needed. I understood their needs well. I had ready-made content they had already approved. The afternoon before the presentation, I decided to add some finishing touches. It already looked good, but I worried it didn't look good enough. I decided to scrap it and start over. I got consumed with a new idea that I was convinced would wow them. I ended up staying up all night rewriting my whole presentation. New slides, new handouts, all of which were of course untested. As I drove to the company's offices the next morning, I was exhausted. My mind was foggy. When I arrived, I was running on the fumes of my nervous energy. As the presentations began, my stomach sank. My opening story was unpolished. The slides were unfamiliar. I kept having to turn around to see what was on the screen. One of the first slides failed to convey the point I was trying to make. In short, I bombed. As I left, I was hyperventilating. I had been given this incredible opportunity and I had blown it. The client canceled the other 2 presentations. They did not hire me for the extended engagement. It was my most humiliating professional failure ever. I was burned out from the experience and I didn't even walk away with the results I wanted. As I reflected on how this had all gone so wrong, the answer was obvious. Nailing this presentation was so important to me. I had overthought it. I had over-engineered it. I tried too hard. As a result, I'd snatched defeat from the jaws of victory. Here is what I learned. Trying too hard makes it harder to get the results you want. Here's what I realized. Behind almost every failure of my whole life, I had made the same error. When I'd failed, it was rarely because I hadn't tried hard enough. It was because I'd been trying too hard. We are conditioned over the course of our lifetimes to believe that in order to overachieve, we must also overdo. As a result, we make things harder for ourselves than they need to be. Effortless inversion. Carl Jacobi. The 19th century German mathematician developed a reputation as someone who could solve especially hard and intractable problems. You learn to do that most easily. Man muss immer Mckeown, which translates to one must invert, always invert. To invert means to turn an assumption or approach upside down, to walk backward, to ask, what if the opposite were true? Inversion can help you discover obvious insights you have missed because you're looking at the problem from only one point of view. It can highlight errors in our thinking. It can open our minds to new ways of doing things. Assuming that all worthwhile things take enormous effort is one way of looking at a problem. For many overachievers, it's the only way. They have learned how to solve problems even when exhausted or overwhelmed. They are good at getting things done by powering through. Effortless inversion means looking at a problem from the opposite perspective. It means asking, what if this could be easy? It means learning to solve problems from a state of focus, clarity, and calm. It means getting good at getting things done by putting in less effort. There are two ways to achieve all the things that really matter. We can A, gain superhuman powers so we can do all the impossibly hard but worthwhile work, or B, get better at making the impossibly hard but worthwhile work easier. Once we invert the question, even everyday tasks that seem too overwhelming to tackle become easier. For example, the other day I was tidying up my office. As I scanned the room, I saw an old printer we had recently replaced. It had been sitting on my office floor for a couple of weeks, taking up space. It bothered me every time I saw it there. Still, every time I looked at it, I thought of all the steps required to deal with it. Deciding whether to keep it or discard it. Checking the cost of replacing the color ink. Potentially finding a place to give it away. Every time the work involved was enough for a voice in my head to whisper, too much trouble. So I quickly resigned myself to it staying on the floor. However, this time I asked, what if this could be easy? What if all those steps I'd assumed this task entailed were not in fact required steps at all? I then looked up from my desk and happened to see one of the building's workers through the window of my office. I walked outside and asked if he wanted the printer for free. He said yes and took it. The problem was solved within 2 minutes of asking the question. What if we feel overwhelmed? It may not be because the situation is inherently overwhelming. It may be because we are overcomplicating something in our own heads. Asking the question, what if this could be easy, is a way to reset our thinking. It may seem most impossibly simple, and that's exactly why it works. Weak and then possible. The abolitionist William Wilberforce approached his impossibly hard, worthwhile work with great conviction. As a member of Parliament in Britain at the beginning of the 19th century, he fought for the moral case against slavery. He rallied his generation to do the same, but he wanted to attack the slave trade with sweeping legislation to end this barbaric and inhumane system. But for all his effort and for all his fervor, he couldn't make a dent in the law. The forces working against him were massive. There were powerful parties intent on protecting the status quo. There were bystanders who were too consumed with other things to care. There were others who cared but not enough to make the necessary sacrifices. The barriers were too great, the interest too entrenched, the distractions too many. Then one of his fellow abolitionists, James Stephen, had an idea. Rather than continuing to attack the system head-on, he suggested a more indirect approach. In 1805, Stephen wrote a pamphlet entitled War Disguise, or The Frauds of the Neutral Flags. In it, he argued against the use by warring nations of neutral flags on ships. At a time when France and England were at war, French cargo ships were sailing under the neutral American flag to take advantage of a maritime law that protected them from seizure by an enemy. The majority of slave ships sailing to the West Indies were also flying the American flag, because under the law at the time, this meant they could not be stopped by the British Navy. Stephen saw that if England were to change the law to remove that protection, no slave trader would dare allow his vessel to make the journey. Without the protection of neutral flags, the bulk of the British slave trade would be eliminated. Fearing that if he mentioned the slave trade, his arguments might be dismissed, Stephen confined himself entirely to issues of war. His outwardly uncontroversial treatise was swiftly published and went largely unopposed. This seemingly innocuous, deliberately dull paper was in reality a Trojan horse. Beginning in January 1807, the British Privy Council issued the first of a series of war measures against Napoleon, inspired by Stephen's approach. The effect was as had been hoped for. While there were still many battles left to be fought in the name of abolition and racial justice, and still are today, the unconscionable practice of trading enslaved people was formally outlawed across the British Empire just 2 months later, with the passing of the Abolition of the Slave Trade Act. There's no question that some goals are incredibly, almost impossibly hard to achieve. However, even these can sometimes be made less hard once we find an indirect approach. a one-way ticket to easy. Southwest Airlines did just that when they faced a different kind of crisis. Ever since the airline's founding, its business model had depended on keeping costs low and turning planes around on a dime after they landed. Both of these goals were incompatible with the traditional system for printing out tickets. Passengers were accustomed to the industry standard of being handed a printed ticket when they checked in for their flight, but because of the reservation system technology available at the time, producing paper tickets for each passenger was expensive, and they took too long to print at the gate. So executives were forced to decide whether to pay $2 million to build a modern ticketing system. The case for creating the new system was compelling. If we don't do it, management thought we risk for going out of business. But $2 million was a major hit to the bottom line for a low-cost carrier, especially for something that served no practical purpose other than to conform to the practices of the industry. Southwest co-founder Herb Keller insisted there had to be a better way. We are sitting in a management meeting trying to figure out what to do, he recalls, when someone piped him and asked, do we really give a damn what United thinks a ticket is? Isn't it more important what we think a ticket is? Reflexively, we all said, no, we only care what we think a ticket is. So then the manager says, then why don't we just print out a single piece of paper that says, this is a ticket? And that's what they did. Instead of wasting time and resources on building an expensive ticketing system, Southwest decided to issue tickets that could be printed out on ordinary paper and obtained from no-frills automatic dispensers. Merely questioning the necessity of the complex features and functions of an expensive ticketing system revealed a far simpler, cheaper, and easy to execute solution. Free of the assumptions that make your problem look hard, you would be surprised how often an easier solution appears. Can you push something downhill? Marketing author Seth Godin once shared the following. If you can think about how hard it is to push a business uphill, particularly when you're getting started, one answer is to say, why don't you just start a different business you can push downhill? Reid Hoffman, the co-founder of LinkedIn, has said, I've come to learn that part of business strategy is to solve the simplest, easiest, and most valuable problem. And actually, in fact, part of doing strategy is to solve the easiest problem. We think that to be extraordinarily successful, we have to do the things that are hard and complicated. Instead, we can look for opportunities that are highly valuable and simple and easy. Arianna Huffington used to buy into the notion that anything worth doing, required superhuman effort, but she has since said that she didn't become truly successful until she stopped overworking herself. It's also our collective delusion that overwork and burnout are the price we must pay in order to succeed, she says. Of course, there are hard paths to success. Of course, there are examples of people who have exceeded against all odds. They push their boulder up the steep hill through sheer effort. It's heroic, and heroes make for great stories. When we remove the complexity, even the slightest effort can move what matters forward. But stories have created the false impression that pushing uphill is the only path to success. What if for every person who has succeeded through heroic effort, there are others who have employed less heroic and thus less newsworthy strategies to achieve success? Take, for example, Warren Buffett, one of the most successful investors in history, who has described the investment strategy at Berkshire Hathaway as lethargy bordering on sloth. They are not looking to invest in companies that will require enormous effort to achieve profitability. They are looking for investments that are easy to say yes to, no-brainer businesses that are simple to run and have long-term competitive advantages. In other words, I don't look to jump over 7-foot bars. I look around for 1-foot bars that I can step over. When a strategy is so complex that each step feels akin to pushing a boulder up a hill, you should pause. Invert the problem. Ask, what's the simplest way to achieve this result? In the illustration at the bottom of page 37, we see that when we remove the complexity, even the slightest effort can move what matters forward. Momentum grows with the force of gravity. Execution becomes more effortless. When we shelve the false assumption that the easier path has to be the inferior path, obstacles fade away. And as these obstacles disappear, we can begin to uncover our effortless state.